The world is in a weird place when interesting things are happening in Canada. On April 28th, Canadians went to the ballot box to determine who would lead their nation. But this wasn't just any election. This was different. The world watched in anticipation as Canadians cast their votes. But why? What made this election so special? And more importantly, what does this election mean for Canada and the world at large? To answer that, we first need to talk about how Canada's democracy actually works. Unlike most North American nations, Canada does not elect a president. Instead, the Canadian House of Commons determines who leads the country, and the leader of the nation is given the title of Prime Minister. Whichever party holds the most seats in Parliament determines the Prime Minister. Each seat in the Canadian House of Commons represents an electoral district known as a riding. Generally, each riding is made up of about 100,000 voters. In the 2025 election, there were 343 seats up for grabs. The winner of each riding is determined by a first-past-the-post system. Whichever candidate wins the most votes wins the seat of that riding. Like other democracies that use first-past-the-post systems, controversial results can emerge from Canadian elections. In Canada, it's not all that uncommon for a party to lose the popular vote, but win the most seats in Parliament. This has happened several times in Canadian history, two of which were quite recent. In two of Justin Trudeau's victories, he actually lost the popular vote, but maintained power due to Canada's Westminster-style democracy. But more on Trudeau a little bit later. This reality makes it difficult to predict Canadian elections, as the popular vote doesn't really determine who is elected to power. To properly forecast Canadian elections, pollsters need to examine all of Canada's 343 ridings, making it a more difficult task than forecasting America's Electoral College of just 50 states. In any case, there are 6 main political parties of note in Canada's national elections. The Green Party is led by an anti-American American who immigrated to Canada. While the Greens compete in nearly every riding, they typically only win a few seats, and are mostly an insignificant party. The People's Party of Canada is a populist right-wing party, but like the Greens, the PPC struggles to win any significant number of seats in the Parliament. That leaves us with the 4 main Canadian parties. The Bloc Québécois is perhaps Canada's most peculiar party. The BQ is all about Quebec nationalism, advocating for increased autonomy within Canada. As expected, the BQ party only competes for ridings within Quebec. While the BQ will never win a majority in the Parliament, they still play a significant role in Canadian elections. Generally speaking, the people of Quebec lean towards the left on economic issues, but lean to the right on social issues. And they want their culture protected by political means. This includes preserving the French language, immigration restrictions, and barring government employees from displaying religious symbols, such as turbans, hijabs, or crosses. While the Bloc Québécois will never win a national election, they have played spoiler in the past. Quebecers tend to favor Canada's left-wing parties, but if voters feel neglected by the left, the BQ will capitalize on this disenchantment. This was particularly significant in the early 2000s, where the success of the BQ paved the way for a conservative government. The New Democrat Party, or NDP, is the far-left party of Canada, but isn't quite as extreme as other far-left parties in other countries. It would be reasonable to compare the NDP to the Social Democrats of the US. The NDP advocates expanding socialized healthcare to include pharmaceuticals and dental coverage, wants a higher minimum wage, and desires to raise taxes for the rich and corporations, as well as reducing the use of hydrocarbons. But in all actuality, the NDP is rarely considered to have a legitimate chance at winning the Prime Minister's office. Despite these shortcomings, the NDP is still a relevant party in Canadian politics, and alternates from being friend or foe to Canada's main left-wing party. That leaves us with Canada's 2 main political parties, the centre-right Conservatives and the centre-left Liberals. In all actuality, one of these 2 parties are expected to win the most seats in Parliament. The Canadian Conservative Party generally favors lower taxes, pro-business policies, is tougher on crime, and supports the hydrocarbon industry. The Conservatives do support Canada's publicly funded healthcare, but want more private solutions to supplement health coverage. The Canadian Liberal Party believes that government should have a big role in the economy, and subscribes to the notion that government should tax and spend heavily. But to really understand the Liberal-Conservative dynamics in Canada, we need to understand Justin Trudeau and Canada's economy. Justin Trudeau assumed the office of Prime Minister in 2015 after voters became frustrated with the Conservative government. Before Trudeau, the Conservatives led Canada for about 10 years. This is a recurring theme in Canadian politics. With the lack of term limits, prime ministers tend to stay in power beyond their welcome, and voters develop a sense of incumbent fatigue. Trudeau was elected on the promise of bringing real change to Canada. Trudeau's youth and optimism was a welcoming contrast to prime ministers of the past. Trudeau delivered on his campaign promises of taxing and spending, increasing the amount of immigrants to Canada, attacking carbon emissions, and taking a progressive stance on culture war issues. Trudeau enjoyed popular approval ratings during his first few years in office, but his popularity would start to erode by 2018. Despite a fall in the ratings, Trudeau was able to squeak out one last electoral victory in 2021, although his party did lose the popular vote. But from 2021 onwards, Trudeau's net approval rating would always be negative, and for good reason. Economically speaking, life is quite difficult for the average Canadian. Canadians are suffering a cost of living crisis far more severe than their peers. The main culprit of Canada's economic woes is affordable housing. Now, economists disagree on what the ideal home price is, but let's just settle on a 3.5 price-to-income ratio. That's to say it would take the average person 3.5 years to pay for the average house, assuming they devoted all of their salary to their mortgage. In the United States, the price-to-income ratio is about 5.5. In New York City alone, the price-to-income ratio is 7.1. But in Canada, the price-to-income ratio is 7.7. This means that New York City has more affordable housing than Canada. Meanwhile, Vancouver measures at 11.6, and Toronto at 11.8. In cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Victoria, residents need to save for decades just to build up enough cash for the down payment on a home. In most Canadian cities, only the top 10% of earners can even qualify for a mortgage. Unfortunately, Canada's cost of living crisis extends well beyond housing. Since 1980, Canadian wages have increased by 14%, but that's where the good news ends. Gasoline has gone up 24%, food 273%, electricity 288%, and education at a staggering 713%.
I know how the hell people in Canada are even living. I'm luckier than a lot of other people, but how the hell is anyone existing in Canada? Like, I feel trapped.
I come home to Newmarket, Ontario, the suburbs of Toronto, and I'm shocked at the cost of living here. How are Canadian people making it work? Everybody involved with the economy right now needs to be fired immediately.
Talk about possibly leaving Canada because why should we stay here just to be overtaxed, underserviced, healthcare sucks, education sucks, government is bloated.
Over a third of young adults in Canada continue to live with their parents. As expected, there's been a lashing out against Trudeau and his Liberal Party.
We're going to invest in you and your job?
I don't believe you for a second.
But the economy is not the only factor at play. In the winter of 2022, a convoy of protesters descended onto Ottawa to protest COVID restrictions. The convoy drew international attention, and protesters received donations from around the world. In response, Trudeau made an unprecedented move. For the first time in Canadian history, the Emergencies Act was utilized, which granted the government extraordinary powers. Trudeau froze the protesters' bank accounts, effectively starving them out. The truckers' rally was a polarizing event. Conservatives were enraged by Trudeau's actions, and they wanted to hit back hard. The Conservatives desired a strong leader who wasn't afraid to be tough on Trudeau, and they certainly found such a leader in a man named Pierre Poilievre. Poilievre was elected the leader of the Conservatives in the summer of 2022. The Calgary-born politician fulfilled his role of aggressively attacking Trudeau. He utilized parliamentary sessions to launch clever insults against the Prime Minister and his Liberal Party.
The high school drama teacher over here accuses others of liking the sounds of their own voices. This from a guy who, if he were made of chocolate, he would eat himself.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I was a high school teacher before getting into politics, and I'm having a little trouble remembering what exactly the job that the Leader of the Opposition had before getting into politics.
Yes, and he left right in the middle of the semester, and I'm having trouble remembering why. Now, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to ask you again, because nobody believes you when you say you don't know how much money your family has got from the We Group. So you've had a month to look into that. You knew you were going to testify here. Again, how much money total have your brother, mother, and spouse received from this organization? How much?
That information has been publicly shared, but I will highlight.
Well, then tell me what it is.
My mother
How much?
has
just the dollar figure.
Throughout her life.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Various ways, and is proud
How much?
of the work that she's done, and I'm proud of her.
How
as well.
much? I'm looking for a dollar figure.
We can get that number for you if you like. It's been out in the media.
It's been in the media, but you don't know it?
I don't have it in front of me. And quite
you don't
frankly,
know how much your family has received from this organization, which you tried to give $500 million, really?
Poilievre also capitalized on global conservative trends. He joined the chorus of commentators that lamented against wokeism, lashed out against the elite, and cleverly used social media to go viral on several occasions.
On the topic, I mean, in terms of your sort of strategy currently, you're obviously taking the populist pathway.
What does that mean?
Well, appealing to people's more emotional levels, I would guess. I mean, certainly you tap very strong ideological language quite frequently.
Like what?
Left wing, this and that, right wing. I mean, it's that type of ideological thing.
I never really talk about left or right.
Anyways, I don't
really believe in that.
Okay, a lot of people would say that you're simply taking a page out of the Donald Trump book.
Like which people would say that?
Well, I'm sure a great many Canadians, but
like who?
I don't know who, but
well, you're the one who asked the question, so yeah. You must know somebody.
Pierre's social media success even spread outside of Canada, receiving a notable amount of praise from conservatives in the US and the UK. But Poilievre is more than just a soundbite machine. The conservative leader crafted detailed policies that would be enacted under a conservative government. Perhaps the most popular of the campaign promises was to repeal Canada's carbon tax. Trudeau implemented a tax on carbon emissions in an effort to address climate change, but creating a new tax during a cost of living crisis did not settle well with many Canadians, making the carbon tax a liberal liability. Poilievre promised to axe the carbon tax and made it a key point in his political posturing. Things were looking great for Poilievre and the Conservatives. In January of 2025, Polymarket gave Poilievre a 93% chance of being the next Prime Minister. The Conservatives were not only expected to win, but were rather expected to win by historic margins. It seemed that Canada was heading for an easy-to-predict, routine election. The party that had ruled for a decade was now wildly unpopular and would soon be replaced. But then everything changed south of the border. Trudeau's popularity had sunk so low that he was no longer able to lead his own party. After having a public fallout with his deputy prime minister, Trudeau announced his resignation, but the resignation would not be immediate, giving the Liberals about 3 months to select a new leader. What should have been a routine, lame duck period for Trudeau's final weeks in office turned out to be quite dramatic. The US had just elected Donald Trump, and the two nations were on a collision course. It's no secret that Trump and Trudeau never really liked each other during Trump's first term. Their relationship was plagued with aggressive posturing. While the two leaders certainly had ideological differences, it is quite obvious that their mutual disdain was on a deeper, personal level.
President Trump's mood may well have been soured by this video. Canada's Prime Minister caught apparently gossiping about him to Boris Johnson and others. The president hit back at Justin Trudeau.
Well, he's two-faced.
Time did not heal the Trump-Trudeau rivalry, and after Trump was elected for a second time, Trudeau had a press conference that was a bit condescending towards Americans.
It shouldn't be that way. It wasn't supposed to be that way. We were supposed to be on a steady, if difficult sometimes, march towards progress. And yet, just a few weeks ago, the United States voted for a second time to not elect its first woman president.
And from that point forward, Canadian-US relations were headed for the rocks. Trump threatened Canada with a 25% blanket tariff, which was probably going to happen regardless of Trudeau. Nonetheless, the threat was perceived as a negotiation tactic, and Trudeau went to Mar-a-Lago to hopefully smooth out the situation. The meeting was friendly, but the kindness would not last. Trump would make multiple postings referring to Trudeau as a governor, and that Canada should become the 51st state. Initially, this was perceived as routine trolling from Trump, but the persistence of Trump's rhetoric began to raise eyebrows. High-ranking Republicans struggled to clarify if Trump was serious or joking.
But I'm asking you now, do you consider what the president has said about Canada becoming the 51st state, is he serious?
You know, I'll tell you how that came about, okay? He's in a meeting with Trudeau, and Trudeau basically says that if the U.S. imposes tariffs on Canada, Canada couldn't survive as a nation state, at which point the president said, well, then you should become a state. And that's where this began. That said, the president has made an argument for why. He says he loves Canada.
I don't know when you guys are kidding or not. That's the thing. You can't, there's no parity that rises above what the reality is. So you're going to have to tell me if you're kidding or not.
I think everything is on the table until it's not.
Including taking over Canada?
No. We like the Canadians.
So they can be a sovereign country?
The annexation threats did not sit well with Canadian voters. While polling data from the Angus Reid Institute found that 10% of Canadians would like to join the US, the other 90% were seething with rage. At best, Canadians were insulted by Trump's annexation rhetoric. At worst, it was viewed as a legitimate threat to Canadian sovereignty. American products were boycotted, vacations to the US were cancelled, and Canada was swept up in a nationalistic fervor.
This country is the greatest country in the world. Don't ever forget it. We will never be the 51st state, and we gotta fight for it, though. Elbows up, everybody!
Trump's annexation threats were also politically questionable in the US. The Angus Reid Institute found that amongst Trump voters, only 14% support the idea of using pressure to annex Canada, while 44% are against annexation altogether. Additionally, pro-Canada protests popped up in Detroit and Washington state. Meanwhile, the Liberals still had to find a replacement for Trudeau. The party held internal elections to select their new leader, who would subsequently also hold the office of Prime Minister. Mark Carney emerged as the early favorite, and eventually won the race. This despite the fact that only 7% of Canadians knew who Mark Carney was a few months prior. Per Abacus data, as Carney was now a Prime Minister who hasn't won an election, he quickly called for a snap election to be held in the following weeks. While similar in political values, Carney holds unique qualifications that were missing from Trudeau's resume. Carney has economic degrees from Harvard and Oxford, was the governor of the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis, and then governor for the Bank of England during Brexit. Carney also has notable private sector experience, specifically with Bloomberg and Goldman Sachs. Electing a decorated economist to lead the Liberals was no coincidence. The cost of living crisis remains a very politically salient issue, and by choosing a technocratic economist, the Liberals signaled that they are uniquely qualified to address the crisis. All of this was very bad news for Poilievre and the Conservatives. The Liberal Party is often associated with nationalism and patriotism, and with Trump's tariffs and annexation threats, support for the Liberals soared, and with the unpopular Trudeau being replaced by an economist, voters became somewhat more comfortable with the Liberals on economic issues. And just to make matters worse for the Conservatives, Carney went ahead and brought the consumer carbon tax to zero. In just a few months, Poilievre's entire campaign strategy was shattered, and his odds of winning the election completely tanked. The once heavily favored Poilievre was now the underdog. To shore up support, Poilievre deployed anti-Trump, tough on America messaging. It didn't take long for the two candidates to deploy aggressive attack ads, both accusing the other of being weak on America.
Trump wants our jobs.
We're going to take other countries' jobs.
And Mark Carney is just the man to help him. Trudeau and Carney sold out Canada with job-killing taxes that push jobs south. He opposed Canadian pipelines while profiting off U.S. coal. Carney even moved his company's headquarters to New York, just as Trump wanted.
You sneaky.
Carbon tax Carney. If Carney wins, Canada loses.
Everything is broken.
Everything is broken. Fake news.
Fake news.
The left-wing censorship regime.
Their woke censorship ideology.
Defeating the radical left.
Radical leftist authoritarian.
We want those great Canadian truckers to know that We are with them all the way.
I'm proud of the truckers and I stand with them.
Have turned our once great cities into cesspools of bloodshed and crime.
Unleashed a crime wave like we have never seen.
Despite all the tough campaigning, the polls didn't move all that much during the official campaign season. On election day, most voters cast their votes for Carney and the Liberal Party. The Liberals won the popular vote, and the Conservatives were only a few percentage points behind. All of the minor parties had terrible results, so bad that the leader of the NDP lost his own riding and resigned his leadership position on election night. In terms of converting votes into parliament seats, the Liberals proved to be more efficient than their Conservative rivals, and are expected to have about a 20-seat lead when all the close ridings are finally called. While the Liberals won the most seats, they failed to capture an outright majority. Carney will lead a minority government, which will be dependent on support from the NDP, and possibly the BQ. But this election really wasn't about Carney. It was more about Trudeau's legacy and Trump's shadow. Carney positioned himself as a steady hand to guide the economy, and warned that Canada can no longer rely on the US. He even threatened to dump US Treasury bonds if Trump plays hardball, potentially triggering a bond crisis in the United States, given that Canada is a major holder of US debt. But without a majority, Carney walks a tightrope, and no confidence vote could come swiftly if he falters. Globally, the message is clear. Trump may now be a liability for conservative movements. The Canadian Conservatives were poised to win big, but Trump deserves a large amount of blame for their defeat. A similar dynamic seems to be playing out in Australia's ongoing election. As for Canada, this election might be the beginning of the end for Canada's multi-party system. Typical third-party voters opted to vote strategically instead of their preferred choice, which is common for first-past-the-post democracies. And if this election is establishing a new trend, Canadian politics will become more polarized and more vindictive, much like their southern neighbor. If you enjoyed this video, then the algorithm thinks you'll enjoy this one as well. Thanks, and see you next time.